Just So Stories by Rudyard Kipling. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Tim Bulkley of BigBible.org. Just So Stories, Chapter 8. How the First Letter Was Written. Once upon a most early time was a Neolithic man. He was not a Jute, or an Angle, or even a Dravidian, which he might well have been, best beloved, but never mind why. He was a primitive, and he lived cavily in a cave, and he wore very few clothes, and he couldn't read, and he couldn't write, and he didn't want to, and except when he was hungry, he was quite happy. His name was Tegumai Bopsulai, and that means man who does not put his foot forward in a hurry. But we, O best beloved, will call him Tegumai for short. And his wife's name was Teshumai Tewindro, and that means lady who asks a very many questions. But we, O best beloved, will call her Teshumai for short. And his little girl daughter's name was Tafimai Metalumai, and that means small person without any manners who ought to be spanked. But I'm going to call her Taffy. She was Tegumai Bopsulai's best beloved, and her own mummy's best beloved, and she was not spanked half as much as was good for her. And they were all three very happy. As soon as Taffy could run about, she went everywhere with her daddy Tegumai, and sometimes they would not come home to the cave till they were hungry, and then Teshumai Tewindro would say, "Where in the world have you two been to get so shocking dirty? Really, my Tegumai, you're no better than my Taffy." Now, attend and listen. One day Tegumai Bopsulai went down through the beaver swamp to the Wagai River to spear carpfish for dinner, and Taffy went too. Tegumai's spear was made of wood with shark's teeth at the end, and before he had caught any fish at all, he accidentally broke it clean across by jabbing it down too hard on the bottom of the river. They were miles and miles from home. Of course, they had their lunch with them in a little bag, and Tegumai had forgotten to bring any extra spears. "There's a pretty kettle of fish," said Tegumai. "It will take me half a day to mend this." "There's your big black spear at home," said Taffy. "Let me run back to the cave and ask Mummy to give it me." "It's too far for your little fat legs," said Tegumai. "Besides, you might fall into the beaver swamp and be drowned. We must make the best of a bad job." He sat down and took out a little leather mendy bag, full of reindeer sinews and strips of leather and lumps of beeswax and resin, and began to mend the spear. Taffy sat down too, with her toes in the water and her chin in her hand, and thought very hard. Then she said, "I say, Daddy, it's an awful nuisance that you and I don't know how to write, isn't it? If we did, we could send a message for the new spear." "Taffy," said Tegumai, "how often have I told you not to use slang? Awful isn't a pretty word. But it could be a convenience, now you mention it, if we could write home." Just then a stranger man came along the river, but he belonged to a far tribe, the Tewaras, and he did not understand one word of Tegumai's language. He stood on the bank and smiled at Taffy, because he had a little girl daughter of his own at home. Tegumai drew a hank of deer sinews from his mendy bag and began to mend his spear. "Come here," said Taffy. "Do you know where my mummy lives?" And the stranger man said, being, as you know, a Tewara. "Silly," said Taffy, and she stamped her foot, because she saw a shoal of very big carp going up the river just when her daddy couldn't use his spear. "Don't bother grown-ups," said Tegumai, so busy with his spear mending that he did not turn around. "I aren't," said Taffy. "I only want him to do what I want him to do, and he won't understand." "Then don't bother me," said Tegumai, and he went on pulling and straining at the deer sinews with his mouth full of loose ends. The stranger man, a genuine Tewara he was, sat down on the grass, and Taffy showed him what her daddy was doing. The stranger man thought, "This is a very wonderful child. She stamps her foot at me, and she makes faces. She must be the daughter of that noble chief, who is so great that he won't take any notice of me." So he smiled more politely than ever. "Now," said Taffy, "I want you to go to my mummy, because your legs are longer than mine, and you won't fall into the beaver swamp, and ask for Daddy's other spear, the one with the black handle that hangs over our fireplace." The stranger man, and he was a Tiwara, thought, "This is a very, very wonderful child. She waves her arms and she shouts at me, but I don't understand a word of what she says. But if I don't do what she wants, I greatly fear that that haughty chief, man who turns his back on callers, will be angry." He got up and twisted a big flat piece of bark off a birch tree and gave it to Taffy. He did this, best beloved, to show that his heart was as white as the birch bark, and that he meant no harm. But Taffy didn't quite understand. "Oh," she said, "now I see. You want my mummy's living address. Of course I can't write, but I can draw pictures if I've anything sharp to scratch with. Please lend me the shark's tooth off your necklace." The stranger man, and he was a Tiwara, didn't say anything, so Taffy put up a little hand and pulled at the beautiful bead and seed and shark tooth necklace round his neck. The stranger man, and he was a Tiwara, thought, "This is a very, very, very wonderful child. The shark's tooth on my necklace is a magic shark's tooth, and I was always told that if anybody touched it without my leave, they would immediately swell up or burst. But this child doesn't swell up or burst. And that important chief, man who attends strictly to his business, who has not yet taken any notice of me at all, doesn't seem to be afraid that she will swell up or burst. I had better be more polite." So he gave Taffy the shark's tooth, and she lay down flat on her tummy with her legs in the air, like some people on the drawing room floor when they want to draw pictures. And she said, "Now I'll draw you some beautiful pictures. You can look over my shoulder, but you mustn't joggle. First I'll draw Daddy fishing. It isn't very like him, but Mummy will know, because I've drawn his spear all broken. Well, now I'll draw the other spear that he wants, the black-handled spear. It looks as if it was sticking in Daddy's back, but that's because the shark's tooth slipped and this piece of bark isn't big enough. That's the spear I want you to fetch. So I'll draw a picture of me myself splaining to you. My hair doesn't stand up like I've drawn, but it's easier to draw that way. Now I'll draw you. I think you're very nice, really, but I can't make you pretty in the picture, so you mustn't be offended. Are you offended?" The stranger man, and he was a Tiwara, smiled. He thought, there must be a big battle going to be fought somewhere, and this extraordinary child, who takes my magic shark's tooth, but who does not swell up or burst, is telling me to call all the great chief's tribe to help him. He is a great chief, or he would have noticed me. "Look," said Taffy, drawing very hard and rather scratchily. "Now I've drawn you. I've put the spear that Daddy wants into your hand, just to remind you that you're to bring it. Now I'll show you how to find my mummy's living address. You go along till you come to 2 trees. Those are trees. Then you go over the hill, that's a hill, and then you come to a beaver swamp that's full of beavers. I haven't put in all the beavers because I can't draw beavers, but I've drawn their heads, and that's all you'll see of them when you cross the swamp. Mind you don't fall in. Then our cave is just beyond the beaver swamp. It isn't as high as the hills really, but I can't draw things very small. That's my mummy outside. She is beautiful. She is the most beautifulest mummy there ever was. But she won't be 'fended when she sees I've drawn her so plain. She'll be pleased of me, because I can draw. Now, in case you forget, I've drawn the spear that Daddy wants outside our cave. It's inside really, but you show the picture to my mummy and she'll give it to you. I've made her holding up her hands, because I know she'll be so pleased to see you. Isn't it a beautiful picture? And do you quite understand? Or shall I explain again?" The stranger man, and he was a Tiwara, looked at the picture and nodded very hard. He said to himself, "If I do not fetch this great chief's tribe to help him, he will be slain by his enemies, who are coming up on all sides with spears. Now I see why the great chief pretended not to notice me. He feared that his enemies were hiding in the bushes and would see him. Therefore he turned to me his back. Let the wise and wonderful child draw the terrible picture, showing me his difficulties. I will away and get help for him from his tribe." He did not even ask Taffy the road, but raced off into the bushes like the wind, with the birch bark in his hand, and Taffy sat down, most pleased. Now, this is the picture that Taffy had drawn for him. "What have you been doing, Taffy?" said Tegumai. He had mended his spear and was carefully waving it to and fro.